Let me show you something worth noticing. There's a certain kind of person who never talks about what they're not buying. They don't announce it. They don't make a show of restraint. They just quietly pass on things that most people would say yes to without thinking twice. And if you watch them long enough, you start to notice something strange. They're not depriving themselves. They're not miserable. They're just operating with a different internal calculus that most people never develop. I knew someone like this years ago. He made decent money, not extraordinary, but comfortable. And every few months, someone in his circle would get something new. A car upgrade, a kitchen renovation, a trip that got posted about endlessly, and he'd congratulate them genuinely and then just continue on exactly as he was. No visible friction, no resentment. It wasn't that he couldn't afford those things. It was that he had already decided they weren't part of his plan, and that decision had been made so far in advance that it didn't require willpower in the moment. Most people think discipline is about forcing yourself to do hard things or stopping yourself from doing easy things. And that's part of it. But the kind of discipline that actually builds wealth over decades isn't the white-knuckle kind. It's not about resisting temptation every single day until you're exhausted. It's about arranging your internal world so that certain choices stop feeling like choices at all. They just become what you do. What makes this invisible is that it doesn't look like sacrifice from the outside. The person isn't suffering. They're not posting about their journey or their progress. They're just consistently making decisions that compound in a direction most people aren't even aiming toward. And because it's quiet, because it doesn't announce itself, most people never recognize it as discipline at all. They see it as luck or timing or some kind of natural advantage. But it's not. It's the result of a very specific mental structure that takes years to build and almost no effort to maintain once it's in place. Here's what actually happens in the mind of someone who has this. They've created categories, not budgets, not rules, but deep internal categories about what money is for. And once something falls outside those categories, it's not even processed as an option. It's like asking them if they want to buy a car they can't drive or a book in a language they can't read. The answer isn't no. It's just not applicable. And that distinction is everything. When most people see something they want, the question is, should I buy this? And that question opens up a negotiation. They start weighing short-term pleasure against long-term goals. They think about whether they deserve it, whether they've been good, whether it's been a hard week. And all of that creates friction, and friction creates fatigue, and fatigue creates exceptions. One exception leads to another, and pretty soon the plan isn't really a plan anymore. It's just a vague intention that gets overridden whenever the moment feels compelling enough. But the person with real discipline isn't having that conversation. They've already categorized that purchase as something outside their system. And because it was decided in advance, in a calm moment, with clarity about what they're building toward, there's no emotional load in the moment of encounter. It's just not for them. Not right now. Maybe not ever. And they're fine with that because the thing they're aiming toward feels more real than the thing in front of them. This is where most people misunderstand themselves. They think they lack discipline because they keep giving in to impulses. But the real issue is that they never built a structure strong enough to make those impulses irrelevant. They're trying to win a fight that shouldn't be happening in the first place. And you can't win that fight forever. Willpower is finite. but identity isn't. Once you've decided at the identity level what kind of person you are with money, the individual decisions stop being battles. They're just confirmations. What's strange is that this doesn't make life smaller. It makes it larger. Because the person who has learned to ignore the constant churn of new things, new upgrades, new incremental improvements to a lifestyle that was already fine, that person has freed up an enormous amount of mental space. They're not constantly evaluating. They're not comparing themselves to others. They're not second-guessing. They're just moving in a direction they chose a long time ago, and that movement compounds in ways that are almost impossible to see in the short term, but unmistakable over years. I think what makes this hard to learn is that no one teaches it directly. You're taught to budget, to save, to invest, but you're not taught how to build the psychological infrastructure that makes those behaviors automatic. You're not taught that the most important financial skill isn't math or market knowledge. It's the ability to construct an internal world where your long-term self has more authority than your present moment self. And that doesn't happen through effort. It happens through clarity. The people who have this aren't more disciplined in the way we usually think about discipline. They're just more honest with themselves about what they actually want. Not what sounds good in theory, not what they think they should want, but what they would choose if they could see their entire life laid out in front of them and decide from that vantage point. And once you see it that way, once you really internalize that every small decision is a vote for a particular kind of future, the decisions start to make themselves. There's a kind of wealth that comes from earning more, and there's a kind that comes from needing less. And most people focus all their energy on the first kind because it feels like progress. But the second kind is just as powerful, maybe more so, because it's entirely within your control. You don't need a promotion or a windfall or a lucky break. You just need to decide what your money is actually for, and then build a life that reflects that decision in every ordinary moment. The hard part is that this takes time to show results. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make for good stories. You can't point to a single moment where everything changed. It's just years of small, consistent choices that didn't feel important at the time, but added up to something that eventually becomes undeniable. And by the time other people notice, by the time they start asking how you did it, the answer sounds too simple to be useful. You just didn't buy things you didn't need. You just kept going. You just decided early and stuck with it. But that simplicity hides a psychological achievement that most people never reach, because they never realize it's the thing that matters most. What you're really building isn't wealth. It's a kind of immunity to the constant pressure to be someone you're not. And once you have that, once you've internalized that, your life doesn't need to look like anyone else's to be valuable. The money part almost takes care of itself. Not because you're depriving yourself, but because you've stopped asking the wrong questions. You're no longer wondering what you can afford. You're only asking what serves the life you're actually trying to build, and that's a completely different calculation. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next.